The summer of 1878 hung heavy over the town of Silver Ridge, Montana Territory. Dust kicked up from every footfall, coating the weathered buildings in a permanent haze. Once a bustling silver mining settlement, Silver Ridge had fallen on hard times as the mines began to yield less and the price of silver continued its slow decline. What had been a booming town of nearly 3,000 souls just years before now struggled to maintain half that number. Jack Thornton guided his horse down the rutted main street. His weathered Stetson pulled low against the late afternoon sun. At 43, Jack carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had weathered both prosperity and hardship. Silver streaked his dark hair at the temples, and deep lines etched around his eyes told of squinting into both harsh sun and uncertain futures. The cattle he'd driven to Helena had fetched a fair price. Not the premium of years past, but enough to keep him solvent for another season. $117 jingled in the leather pouch tucked inside his vest. Not a fortune, but honest money from honest work. In a territory where fortunes were still made and lost on the turn of a card or the whisper of a new strike, Jack took quiet pride in the predictable rhythm of ranch life. As he passed the assayer's office, he nodded to Hiram Wells, who sat in a wooden chair tilted back against the wall. "Evening, Jack," Hiram called. "Good trip?" "Can't complain," Jack replied, reining his horse to a stop. "Cattle market's holding steady. How are things here?" Hiram spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Quieter by the day. The Wandering Star closed up last week. That's the third mine this year." "You staying over?" Hiram asked after they'd discussed the mines. "Just the night. Need supplies, and figured I'd have a proper meal and a drink before heading back." "Well, you've timed it right if it's entertainment you're after. Mercer's got a new girl in at the Gilded Horseshoe, holding one of his auctions tonight." The old man's tone made clear what he thought of such affairs. Jack's jaw tightened. Silas Mercer had opened the Gilded Horseshoe 5 years ago, after the more respectable establishments had begun to close. The auctions were his specialty, bringing in desperate young women from back east with promises of respectable employment, then essentially selling their contracts to the highest bidder once they arrived, penniless and isolated. "Think I'll pass on that," Jack said, his voice cooling. After stabling his horse, Jack made his way to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. The 2-story clapboard building had once been painted white, though years of dust storms had left it a weathered gray. Like everything in Silver Ridge, it had seen better days, but it was clean and quiet. The widow Holloway greeted him with the easy familiarity of long acquaintance. "Jack Thornton, as I live and breathe, still living up in that valley all alone with your cattle and ghosts." "The cattle are good company, Martha," he replied with a small smile. "Got a room for the night?" After getting his key, Jack hesitated. "Heard there's some goings-on at Mercer's place tonight." Martha's face tightened. "That man's a plague on this town, bringing in another poor girl who doesn't know what she's in for. Came in on yesterday's stage, looking no more than 20, if that." She shook her head. "I offered her a place here instead, told her whatever Mercer promised her was likely lies, but she's got no money to get back east. Said her father died owing debts, and she'd been told there was respectable work out here for a young lady with education." The familiar story twisted something in Jack's gut. Mercer ought to be run out of town. "Should have been done years ago," Martha agreed, "but the town council's scared of losing what little business is left." Jack washed up in his room, catching his reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The years had weathered his face like they had the land. Sometimes he hardly recognized himself from the eager young man who had come west with Sarah, full of dreams about building a cattle empire. He traced the scar that ran along his jawline, a souvenir from a Blackfoot raid in '62. Sarah had stitched that wound herself, her hands steady even as tears streamed down her face. She'd been 6 months pregnant then. Neither she nor the baby had lived to see the following spring, taken by a fever that swept through the valley. After enjoying Martha's hearty beef stew, Jack found himself considering the auction at Mercer's. If there was a young woman about to be sold into what amounted to indentured servitude, did he have a right to turn a blind eye? "What do you know about this girl?" he asked Martha. "Name's Rose," Martha replied, lowering her voice. "From St. Louis, educated, from the way she speaks. Came out on some promise of being a hotel hostess." She shook her head. By the time they realize what Mercer's really offering, they're trapped. No money to leave, no place to go. Jack pushed his empty bowl away, a decision crystallizing. Think I'll take a walk. The gilded horseshoe's windows glowed with lamplight as Jack approached. The batwing doors swung open easily, and the noise washed over him. Laughter, cursing, the clinking of glasses, and a discordant piano. The place was crowded with miners, cowboys, and townsmen. Once a fine establishment with a mahogany bar and gilt-frame mirrors, the saloon had deteriorated along with the town. The mirrors were cracked, the gilt peeling, and the floor sticky with spilled liquor. A haze of smoke hung in the air, illuminated by kerosene lamps. Jack ordered a whiskey at the bar, surveying the room. A few women in gaudy dresses circulated among the patrons, laughing too loudly at crude jokes. Silas Mercer held court at the far end of the bar, a bulky man with a florid face and calculating eyes. His silk vest strained across his substantial belly, and a gold watch chain glinted in the lamplight. "Quite a crowd tonight," Jack remarked to the bartender. "Boss's auctions always draw 'em in," the man replied. "Dollar's all it takes to get in the game. Course, it'll go higher for this one. She's a looker and fresh off the stage. Educated, too." As the clock neared 8, Mercer stepped onto a small platform at the back of the room. "Gentlemen, your attention, please." The room fell silent. "Tonight we have a special treat, all the way from St. Louis, a young lady of refinement and education, guaranteed to bring a touch of culture to your evenings." Mercer gestured toward a curtained doorway. "Without further ado, I present to you Miss Rose." The curtain parted, and a young woman stepped hesitantly into the light. Jack's breath caught. She was slim and fine-boned, with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple style. Her dress, with its high neckline and long sleeves, clearly showed she had not understood what kind of establishment she was joining. But it was her eyes that struck Jack most forcefully. Large and expressive, they darted around the room with a combination of fear and desperate calculation. This was a woman who had just realized the terrible mistake she had made. Mercer placed a proprietary hand on Rose's shoulder, and she flinched slightly. "Miss Rose comes to us highly recommended for her skills in conversation, music, and the social graces. As is our custom, we'll start the bidding at $1 for a month's contract. Who'll open?" $1, called a voice from the back, followed by laughter. $2, countered another. Rose stood rigid on the platform, her gaze fixed somewhere above the heads of the crowd, her hands clasped tightly before her. In that moment, she reminded Jack painfully of Sarah in her final days. The same desperate dignity in the face of circumstances beyond her control. The bidding continued, increasing as men caught up in the spirit of the auction tried to outdo each other. $5, $10, $15. Jack watched with growing disgust as Mercer orchestrated the spectacle, occasionally turning Rose like merchandise to show her fine posture or her delicate hands. $20, called a burly miner who had been winning at cards all evening. Jack felt something shift inside him, some long dormant sense of justice. Watching this young woman being auctioned off like livestock, seeing the fear she tried so hard to conceal, he could no longer stand aside. $100, he said, his voice cutting through the rowdy bidding. A hush fell over the saloon. Mercer squinted into the crowd. "Well now, it seems we have a serious bidder." His gaze landed on Jack. "Mr. Thornton, isn't it? The rancher from up north?" Jack stepped forward. "That's right." Mercer's smile widened. $100 is a generous offer, sir. Very generous indeed. He turned to the crowd. "Do I hear 110? The silence stretched, broken only by murmurs. Even in a town where morals had grown flexible with desperation, there was something unseemly about trying to outbid Jack Thornton, known to be honest and fair dealing. "Going once," Mercer prompted. "Going twice." Sold to Mr. Thornton for $100. Jack approached the platform, feeling Rose's wary gaze. He reached into his vest and withdrew the leather pouch, counting out the bills, nearly all he had made from selling his cattle. As he handed over the money, he met Rose's eyes directly. What he saw wasn't gratitude, but suspicion and fear. A cornered animal trying to gauge whether the new captor would be better or worse than the last. Mercer counted the bills, then produced a folded document. Her contract, sir, all nice and legal, stipulates room, board, and reasonable duties. He winked broadly. What constitutes reasonable duties is, of course, at your discretion. The men nearby laughed, and Rose's shoulders tensed, though her expression remained blank. Jack took the contract and unfolded it, scanning the flowery legal language that disguised what was essentially a form of temporary ownership. With deliberate movements, he tore it in half, then in quarters. A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Mercer's jovial expression faltered. "Now, see here, Thornton." "Miss," Jack said quietly, turning to Rose and tipping his hat slightly. "You're free to go wherever you please." Confusion crossed her face, quickly replaced by disbelief. "What kind of game are you playing, mister?" "No game," Jack replied, "just proving a point." "And what point is that?" she challenged, a spark of defiance breaking through her composure. "That your life is worth more than this." He gestured around the saloon. "More than $1 or 100? Rose stared at him, wariness battling with fragile hope in her eyes. "I've got nowhere to go," she said quietly. Mercer stepped forward, his face darkening. "You can't just tear up a legal contract." "It's not worth the paper it's written on," Jack interrupted, his voice level but carrying an unmistakable note of steel. "Unless you'd like Sheriff Mills to examine exactly how you're bringing these women west and what promises you're making them." Mercer's face flushed, but he wasn't ready to back down entirely. "She's got no money, no family out here. Where's she going to go?" Jack looked at Rose, seeing the calculation behind her wary expression. "I've got a spare room at my ranch," he said. "You can stay until you figure out what's next. No strings attached." The saloon erupted in jeers and crude suggestions. Rose ignored them, her eyes never leaving Jack's face. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, loud enough for only him to hear. "You probably shouldn't," Jack admitted. "But I swear on my wife's grave, you'll come to no harm from me." Something in his voice must have convinced her. After a long moment, she nodded slightly. "I need to get my things," she said. "I'll wait right here," Jack promised. Outside, the night air was cool and clean after the smoky confines of the saloon. Stars scattered across the vast Montana sky, and the street was quiet except for the muffled sounds from the gilded horseshoe behind them. Rose withdrew her hand from Jack's arm as soon as they were outside. "I appreciate what you did in there, Mr. Thornton, but I need to be clear about something." Her voice was steadier now, with a core of determination. "I won't be beholden to any man. If your offer of shelter comes with expectations, I'd rather take my chances elsewhere." Jack looked at her thoughtfully. In the silver moonlight, her face was a study in stubborn pride despite her circumstances. "The only expectation I have is that you'll tell me if you need anything. The ranch is 10 miles north of town. It's not much, but there's a spare room that no one's using, and plenty of work if you want to earn your keep. Or you can rest up and move on when you're ready." He paused. "Your choice, Miss Rose. Always your choice." She studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, for she nodded slightly. "I accept your offer of shelter then, temporarily." The set of her chin made it clear she considered this a business arrangement, not charity. "And I'll work for my keep." "Fair enough," Jack agreed. "I'm staying at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house tonight. You're welcome to take a room there as well, and we'll head to the ranch in the morning." But Rose shook her head. "I'd prefer to leave Silver Ridge tonight. I don't think Mr. Mercer is the type to accept defeat gracefully." Jack couldn't argue with her assessment. "It'll be a cold ride in the dark." "I've endured worse," she said simply. The quiet dignity in her voice stirred something in Jack's chest, respect, and a strange protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. "All right then. Let me get my horse from the livery and settle up with Mrs. Holloway. We'll be on our way within the hour." As he turned to go, Rose spoke again, her voice softer. "Mr. Thornton, thank you, not just for the room, but for—" She gestured vaguely toward the saloon. "For saying what you did, about my life being worth more." Jack nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's just the truth, Miss Rose." As he walked toward the livery stable, Jack wondered what Sarah would make of his impulsive action, bringing a strange woman home to the ranch, spending nearly all his cattle money to free her from a contract he could have simply ignored. It wasn't like him. He'd spent 12 years keeping to himself, focusing on the simple routines of ranch life, avoiding complications. Yet somehow, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt as if he had done exactly what needed doing. $1. That's all it had cost to start the bidding on a human life. But Jack Thornton had paid 100 to prove that some things, dignity, freedom, basic human decency, were worth any price. Behind him, the lights of Silver Ridge glowed against the vast darkness of the Montana night, a small island of human struggle in an indifferent wilderness. Ahead lay an uncertain future, and a journey with a woman he had just met, whose real name he didn't even know. But for the first time in years, Jack felt something stir within him that he had thought long dead: purpose. The journey to Jack's ranch passed in silence, the creaking of the wagon wheels and the occasional snort from the horses, the only sounds breaking the stillness of the Montana twilight. Rose sat stiffly beside Jack, her small bundle clutched to her chest, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. Jack's ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a modest spread nestled in a valley, with a small herd of cattle grazing in the distance. The main house was simple but solid, built with care rather than ostentation. A large oak tree stood sentinel beside it, its branches casting long shadows in the setting sun. "It's not much," Jack said, breaking the hours-long silence. Rose didn't respond, her knuckles white around her bundle. As Jack helped her down from the wagon, she finally spoke. "I won't be beholden to any man, not even one who thinks he's being noble." Jack nodded. "Fair enough. You can earn your keep if you want, cooking, cleaning, or you can rest up and move on when you're ready. Either way, your choice." Inside, the house was tidy but sparse. A table with 4 chairs sat in the kitchen, though a fine layer of dust suggested it had been long since more than one had been used. Photographs in simple frames lined a shelf, a younger Jack with a smiling woman, her hand resting on a slightly rounded belly. "Your wife?" Rose asked, gesturing toward the photograph. "Sarah," Jack confirmed, his voice rough. "Fever took her and our child 12 years ago." Rose's eyes softened slightly. "I'm sorry." Jack showed her to a small bedroom, plainly furnished but clean. "This was meant to be the nursery," he said, then quickly added, "Bathroom's down the hall. There's soap and towels. I'll heat some water for you." While Rose bathed, Jack prepared a simple meal of beans, biscuits, and coffee. They ate in silence, the weight of their unspoken histories hanging between them. "Why did you really buy my contract?" Rose finally asked, setting down her fork. Jack considered his answer carefully. "I watched my wife die despite everything I tried to do to save her. Couldn't do nothing while Mercer auctioned off your life like it was worth no more than a good saddle. So I'm your charity case? Your way of making peace with your wife's death." There was an edge to her voice, but underneath it, vulnerability. "No," Jack said firmly. "You're a person who deserved better than what life handed you, same as anybody." Rose studied him, as if trying to find the lie in his words. "I was a seamstress in St. Louis," she said suddenly. "My father died owing money to the wrong people. They said I could work off his debt by coming west to be a hostess at a respectable establishment." Her laugh was bitter. "I was a fool." "You were desperate," Jack corrected. "There's a difference." Later that night, as Jack sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, he heard soft crying from the spare room. He remained where he was, giving Rose the privacy to grieve what she'd lost, her home, her dignity, her trust in humanity. The next morning, Jack found Rose in the kitchen, her hair tied back, wearing a patched dress she must have found in a trunk of Sarah's old things. "I'll work for my keep," she announced. "I'm a good cook and can mend anything that needs mending." Jack didn't argue. He understood the need to maintain one's pride. "I've got a ranch hand, Miguel, who helps with the cattle. Otherwise, it's just me. Simple meals are fine." As the days passed, a routine developed. Jack would rise before dawn, tend to the ranch with Miguel, and return at dusk to find the house cleaner than it had been in years and a hot meal waiting. Rose kept to herself, speaking little, but the wariness in her eyes gradually began to fade. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Rose broke their comfortable silence. "The women at the saloon, They say you haven't taken a wife again because you're still in love with a ghost. Jack's hands stilled on the piece of wood he was whittling. People talk a lot in small towns. Is it true? She pressed. Jack considered the question. Not exactly. I loved Sarah with everything I had. When she died, that part of me died too. He looked out at the land he'd worked for 2 decades. Didn't seem fair to offer some woman half a heart. Rose nodded slowly. I understand that better than you might think. For the first time since she'd arrived, Jack saw Rose smile, small and sad, but genuine. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of 2 souls carrying similar wounds. Nearly a month had passed when Jack announced he needed to go into town for supplies. Rose, who had avoided Silver Ridge since their departure from the saloon, volunteered to accompany him. You sure? Jack asked, surprised. Folks in town, they'll talk. Let them, Rose said with newfound determination. I can't hide forever. The journey to town was different this time, filled with Rose pointing out wildflowers or asking questions about the land. Jack found himself talking more than he had in years, explaining how his father had claimed this land after the war, how he'd built it up from nothing. Silver Ridge looked the same as always, but Jack felt the change in how people regarded them as they rode in. Women whispered behind their hands. Men tipped their hats with knowing smirks. Rose held her head high, though Jack noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her shawl. At the general store, Mrs. Abernathy, the owner's wife, and the town's most notorious gossip, made a show of keeping her distance from Rose while shooting disapproving glances at Jack. Don't mind her, Jack murmured. She's been disapproving of me since I refused to court her daughter 15 years ago. Rose's lips twitched in a suppressed smile. As they loaded supplies into the wagon, Sheriff Mills approached. Jack, he nodded curtly, then turned to Rose with considerably less warmth. Miss. Sheriff, Jack acknowledged. Something I can help you with? Just making sure everything's proper, Mills said, his eyes lingering on Rose. Heard you bought this young lady's contract at Mercer's auction. Town's talking about what that means. What it means, Jack said evenly, is that Miss Rose is working as my housekeeper until she decides what she wants to do next. Mills raised an eyebrow. That's so? Because Mercer's mighty upset about losing his investment. Says you had no right to tear up that contract. A contract selling a human being isn't worth the paper it's written on, Jack replied, his voice hardening. I came west of my own free will, Rose interjected, her chin raised defiantly. But the terms were misrepresented. Mr. Thornton has been nothing but respectful and kind. Mills looked between them, clearly not believing their arrangement was as innocent as claimed. Well, just see it stays that way. This is a decent town. As they prepared to leave, Jack noticed Rose had disappeared. He found her outside the town's small church, staring at the building with a complex expression. You religious? He asked gently. I used to be, she replied, before everything. Now, I'm not sure God listens to women like me. If he doesn't, he's not worth praying to, Jack said simply. Rose looked at him with surprise, then understanding. They walked back to the wagon together, shoulders nearly touching. Their return journey was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. Jack reined in the wagon, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle beside him. 3 riders appeared, Mercer and 2 rough-looking men Jack recognized as regulars from the saloon. Well, well, Mercer called, blocking their path. If it ain't the righteous rancher and his purchased woman. Jack felt Rose tense beside him. Move aside, Mercer. We've got no quarrel with you. No quarrel? Mercer spat. You cost me a valuable asset, Thornton. That contract was binding. She's not property, Jack said calmly, though his heart hammered in his chest. Everything has a price, Mercer sneered. You paid it, but now I'm thinking maybe I sold her too cheap. He nodded to his companions, who spread out around the wagon. Mr. Thornton tore up the contract, Rose said, her voice steady despite her fear. I'm a free woman, Mercer laughed. Free? There ain't no such thing as a free woman with your history, darling. You're damaged goods. Jack's hand tightened on the rifle. Last chance, Mercer. Right away. For a tense moment, it seemed Mercer might push the confrontation further. Then, with a cold smile, he backed his horse away. "This ain't over, Thornton. That woman belongs at the Horseshoe, not playing house with some lonely old rancher." As they rode away, Rose released a shaky breath. "I'm bringing you nothing but trouble." Jack set the wagon in motion again. "Trouble finds me whether you're here or not," he said. "Been fighting men like Mercer my whole life." "Why?" Rose asked. Jack thought about it. "My pa fought in the war to free people from bondage. Taught me that standing by while others suffer makes you complicit in that suffering." He glanced at her. "I'm not looking to be a hero, Rose. Just trying to be someone my pa wouldn't be ashamed of." That night, as a summer storm rolled across the valley, Jack woke to the sound of breaking glass. He grabbed his revolver from beside the bed and moved silently through the house. In the kitchen, he found Rose clutching a broom, a broken lantern at her feet. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought I heard something outside. I was going to check." Jack moved to the window, scanning the darkness. Lightning illuminated the yard, revealing nothing out of place. "Probably just the wind," he said, though he wasn't convinced. As Rose cleaned up the broken glass, Jack noticed her hands were shaking. Without thinking, he covered them with his own. "You're safe here," he said. "I promise you that." Rose looked up at him, vulnerability and something else in her eyes. For a moment, they stood connected by touch and shared breath. Then Jack stepped back, suddenly aware of his state of undress and the impropriety of the moment. "Try to get some sleep," he said awkwardly. "I'll keep watch for a while." As he settled into a chair by the window, rifle across his lap, Jack tried to ignore the unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling he'd thought long buried in Sarah's grave. The attempted intimidation by Mercer marked a turning point. Rose no longer kept herself apart, joining Jack on the porch in the evenings, sharing stories of her childhood in St. Louis, her dreams of opening her own dressmaking shop someday. Jack found himself talking about Sarah without the usual stab of pain, remembering the good times rather than just her loss. "She would have liked you," Jack said one evening. "Sarah, I mean. She had no patience for pretense." Rose looked pleased at the comparison. "And I would have liked her, I think. She must have been special to capture your heart." Jack nodded, watching the sunset paint Rose's profile in gold. "She was, but there are different kinds of special in this world." The meaning behind his words hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it. Summer gave way to fall, the aspen trees turned golden, and the mornings carried the first hint of frost. Rose had become an integral part of the ranch, helping Miguel's wife Maria with preserving food for winter, even learning to ride the gentle mare Jack had bought for her birthday, a gesture that had brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Word spread through the county about the former Saloon girl living at the Thornton Ranch. Some neighbors stopped calling. Others, like the Wilsons who farmed the next valley over, made a point of inviting both Jack and Rose to Sunday dinners, treating her with the respect that had been denied her in town. On a crisp October day, Jack returned from checking fence lines to find Rose sitting at the kitchen table with a letter in her hands. "My aunt in Denver," she explained. "I wrote to her after you bought my contract. She's offered me a place to stay, and there's a dressmaker in need of an assistant." Jack felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. He'd known this day might come, had even encouraged Rose to make plans for her future, but the reality of her leaving struck harder than expected. "That's good news," he managed, hanging his hat on its peg. "Denver's a fine city, more opportunities than Silver Ridge could ever offer." Rose watched him carefully. "Yes, it is." That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He'd grown accustomed to Rose's presence, to the sound of her humming as she worked, to the way she'd brought his home back to life. The thought of returning to his solitary existence felt unbearable. Dawn found him on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Rose joined him, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. "When would you leave?" he asked, not looking at her. "The stage comes through on Friday," she replied. "But Jack, They were interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. Jack stood, instinctively moving in front of Rose as 5 men came into view. Mercer, his 2 companions from before, and 2 others Jack didn't recognize. "Stay inside," Jack told Rose, reaching for the rifle he'd left by the door. "No," Rose said firmly, staying at his side. "I'm done hiding." Mercer dismounted, swaggering toward the porch. "Morning, Thornton. I see your housekeeper is still keeping you company." "State your business and go," Jack said coldly. Mercer smirked. I've come to make you a business proposition. Seems my establishment has become quite popular. Men come from 3 counties over now, hoping to find another gem like Miss Rose here. He tipped his hat mockingly in her direction. I'm expanding. Need more girls with her. Quality. Get off my land, Jack growled. Now! Mercer raised his hands in mock surrender. I'm offering you a partnership. You've got an eye for quality merchandise. I've got the business. Together, we could make a fortune. Jack raised his rifle. You're talking about human trafficking, Mercer. That's not just immoral, it's illegal. Mercer laughed. Please! Sheriff Mills looks the other way for a cut of the profits. No one cares about desperate women with nowhere to go. I care, Rose said, her voice ringing clear in the morning air. And so does Jack, and the Wilsons, and Reverend Thomas, who's been helping girls like me find legitimate work in Helena. Mercer's face darkened. You've been interfering with my business? We've been offering choices, Jack corrected. Something you take away from those women. One of Mercer's men moved his hand toward his gun. Jack cocked his rifle. Don't, he warned. Tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Then, unexpectedly, the sound of more horses approached. Sheriff Mills appeared, accompanied by 3 deputies and, surprisingly, Judge Harrison from the county seat. What's this about, Thornton? Mills demanded, looking suspiciously between the 2 groups. Ask Mercer, Jack replied, not lowering his rifle. He was just explaining his human trafficking business. Said you take a cut to look the other way. Mills's face flushed with anger. That a fact? Mercer's confident demeanor faltered. Sheriff, this rancher stole my property. I was just trying to... Miss Rose isn't property, Judge Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of his office. And neither are any of the other young women you've been bringing into the territory under false pretenses. He turned to Mills. Sheriff, I believe we've heard enough to justify an arrest. Mills hesitated, his eyes darting between Mercer and the judge. Whatever he saw in Harrison's expression decided him. Silas Mercer, you're under arrest on suspicion of human trafficking and corruption of a public official. As the deputies moved to take Mercer and his men into custody, the saloon owner's facade cracked. This is your doing, he spat at Rose. You were nothing when you came to my saloon, worth less than the dirt under my boots. Rose stood tall, unintimidated. My worth was never yours to determine, Mr. Mercer. After the commotion died down and the riders departed, Rose and Jack were left alone on the porch, the morning sun now fully risen over their land. How did Judge Harrison know to come here? Jack asked. Rose smiled. I may have written to him as well as my aunt. The Wilsons helped me. There are more good people in this territory than you might think, Jack Thornton. Jack shook his head in amazement. You're something else, Rose. So I've been told, she replied, her eyes twinkling. Jack took a deep breath. About Denver. Yes? Rose prompted when he didn't continue. I was thinking, Jack said slowly, that Silver Ridge could use a good dressmaker, and this house, it's too big for just one person. Rose's expression softened. Are you asking me to stay, Jack? I'm asking for a chance, he clarified. A chance to see if what's growing between us might be worth nurturing. He took her hand tentatively. I know I'm just a simple rancher, and you could have a bigger life in Denver, but... Rose silenced him by squeezing his hand. A bigger life isn't always a better one. What I've found here, respect, purpose, the chance to help others like me, that's worth more than all the opportunities Denver might offer. And what about me? Jack asked, vulnerability plain in his voice. Am I worth staying for? Rose stepped closer, resting her hand against his weathered cheek. Jack Thornton, you showed me that my life was worth more than $1 when I'd forgotten that truth myself. How could you be worth anything less than everything to me? As the autumn sun bathed the ranch in golden light, Jack pulled Rose gently into his arms, 2 souls who had found in each other not just healing, but a future neither had dared to imagine. In the years that followed, the Thornton Ranch became known throughout the territory as a haven for those in need of a second chance. Rose opened her dressmaking shop in town, her designs sought after by women from Helena to Bozeman. Jack continued raising cattle, but also raised eyebrows by hiring women alongside men as ranch hands, giving opportunities to those society had discarded. And on quiet evenings when the work was done and the stars emerged over the Montana hills, Jack would take Rose's hand and remind her of the truth they'd discovered together, that a life's true value could never be measured in dollars, but in the courage to begin again, and in the love that makes such beginnings possible. The end.